All right, friends, welcome. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. Just take a moment. See a lot of amazing things happening. Jenny in California is leaving for Egypt in 2 weeks, which is super exciting. If you've been to Egypt, please give any recommendations. I actually ended up, as a very small side note, ended up in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, totally by accident. I was just on vacation and it happened. And my friend and I did not flee the country as quickly as other people did. And so we ended up going to the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid when they were totally empty, which was sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity. It was probably a little more dangerous in retrospect than it should have been, but super interesting stuff. So Egypt is wonderful. Jared has actually just received his visa for an upcoming trip to Ghana, which is also a wonderful place. So that's really exciting. Other big things happening in the world. Tim in St. Louis, I think AmeriCares is closing on a home, which is very exciting. Some of you are homeowners and know the ups and downs of that. Michael's recovering from some spinal issues. God bless that, Michael. Congratulations. Dan at St. Ambrose is cheering on the Braves tonight. Dan, as you can probably imagine, it's a much happier, there's sort of no joy in Mudville for Mets fans. And so we're struggling a little bit over here right now. Holly at Worcester is just having renewed joy in her work, which is something I hope we can all follow up on. What else? Patrick, not me, is very excited about a Notre Dame victory this weekend, I believe over BYU, but correct me if that's wrong. And then Gina in Arkansas is celebrating the 150th anniversary of Lyon College, or Lyon College. You can tell me how to pronounce that. So that's very exciting. Congratulations to you. I'm trying to think what big things bring me joy this week. One thing that's been really nice, actually, is I just finished a great book in this series called The Thursday Murder Club, which is about a bunch of septuagenarians solving mysteries. This one was called The Man Who Died Twice. Love a good whodunit. So if you have any great mystery books, just drop it in the chat. Would love to know. We'll write it down later. Cynthia says she loves it. It's just this like delightful group of British 70 and 80-year-olds who are solving mysteries. They're so fun. And so anyway, strong recommendation for those books if you need just to sort of escape. But they're very well written. They're very clever, etc. Okay, well, let's dive in. So what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about the state of planned giving in 2022 and what to do in 2023. And, there is a bunch of research that FreeWill has pulled together, but it's not sort of, oftentimes we'll talk about what's happening in the world and what it means for you. This is really a lot more of the story of what you all are currently doing. So it's a reflection on what's happening across the community. And the data reflected here isn't an accident, right? It's the outcomes of a lot of the work of many of you all, and obviously a lot of folks who are not in the conversation today. We'd be really curious, sort of just in the chat, just maybe a yes or no, if planned giving is, let's call it more than 30% of your work overall. So just a yes or no, I'd be curious to know. It looks pretty 50-50. Maybe 40-60, maybe a couple more no's, so it's not quite 30%. Some of you, it's a really big deal. Thank you so much. Okay, and Elizabeth says, no, but we're doing a big push this financial year. So it's a really, really big mix. It's becoming more integrated, which is a really clear trend. So we'll talk about that in a bit. All right, so we're going to dive in today. And basically, what does the last year or so look like? Quick note here. As usual, these are CFRE approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. So this is professional certification. If it's part of what you're doing, pretty simple. At the end of the session, we drop in a quick survey. You make a note in the survey, and then we'll back you up if you ever get audited. So that's pretty straightforward. Agenda for today, very simple. We're going to talk about what are the big trends we're seeing over the last year and what should you do about it, right? Small housekeeping note as usual, but someone's still going to ask in a little bit. Yes, this will be recorded. Yes, slides will be sent around later today. And one other thing maybe before we do this is I'm going to enable the live transcript. So if you you can hide the subtitles, but what that means is that if you are hard of hearing, or potentially if for some people English isn't their first language and we're going to go relatively quickly, you'll have this across the screen as well. But that's been a request from some of our friends in the community who are a little bit harder of hearing. So I realize it can be quite hard to lip read over Zoom. So that's there. And there's a little in that, for some people, it's wildly distracting. Like I can't watch closed captions on movies. If you click the more button at the top in Zoom, there should be a way to hide the transcript or hide subtitles if you don't need that. Okay, well, let's dive in. My name is Patrick. I know a ton of you. I'm very lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO alongside my professional better half, Jenny Shia-Spradling. And we are super delighted to be alongside a team of more than 200 folks, which is really closing in on $7 billion. I sort of checked this morning to say, hey, can we announce $7 billion on the webinar? And the answer is no, not yet. Close to $7 billion raised for nonprofits, which is awesome. And so that's us. But we are also, before we get started, one other quick housekeeping note is we're so grateful you're here. We're so grateful for all the work you're doing in planned giving and fundraising in general. And so we are going to send a gift of one of my other favorite books. This one is by Rob Biesenbach, called The Power of Storytelling. When Hearts Change Minds Gets Results. Many people that we talk to say, I just want to be a better storyteller for donors, also at dinner parties, also with my kids. And so this just breaks down, right? Storytelling is not a natural gift, although some people seem to have it that way. It is a system of setting things up in the right way. And so this hopefully will help you get better at it. This will be, again, make it small note in the survey, not in the chat right now, but in the survey. If you'd like to chance to get a copy, and then just tell us where to send it, and we will. So that's happening as well. We asked you how your week is going. And a couple of things we're seeing, there's this really big tick up over the last few weeks around people feeling anxious. I don't know if that's just going back to school, but if anyone has hypotheses on why that is, feel free to type in the chat. Because you can see sort of happiness is relatively constant, but this anxiety measure, more than a third of folks, or about a third of people, are saying, I'm feeling really anxious right now. So if you have some hypotheses, send that in. Interesting. Some people are saying a mix of some election, that if you're in a swing state, you're getting just overly targeted there. Hurricanes in the Southeast, inflation, economic issues, and then at least someone said the Mets losing, which is a really big problem. I feel like those are all equally weighted in my mind, hurricanes and the Mets losing and the recession. So we'll go there. And then also we see this, slight, after a big jump in late August about likelihood around hitting goals, we're seeing a general trend there as well. So we want to dig in because there's actually a lot of good news happening. Sort of easy to feel anxious, but a ton of good news happening as well. So we asked you, what's your state of planned giving? And when we compared to 2021, has your organization seen an increase or decrease in planned gifts so far in 2022? And about half, a little bit more than half, said about the same. Pretty big group saw an increase, and a very small group saw a decrease. So generally, that's good news across the board. Pretty exciting stuff. We are really, just at the beginning of this great wealth transfer. And so you are going to see a lot of increases over the next 10 years in planned gifts, and hopefully a lot more if you're doing your job well. So that's pretty exciting. When we asked people what their biggest challenges were, this is the ranking of them. So number one sort of most reported Family Feud style, most reported challenges: 1, time and resources; 2, not enough staff and staff capacity, which honestly is just another way to say number 1. Identifying prospects is number 3, educating donors, and prioritizing planned gifts alongside immediate gifts. How do we make that balance? So we'll talk a bit about there. Deborah makes a really interesting point that identifying prospects, but also identifying people who are who've already made a gift in their will, but you don't know about it. So that's a key challenge. When we ask folks, how would you describe how you feel about planned giving this year? You can see a lot of interesting things. You can see things like commitment, donors, big opportunity potential, but also unsure is one of the second or third most common used words. Challenging here, focus, and yet things like great potential, investing. So people are really excited about this, but they also see a little bit of curious and hopeful. So we'll dive in there a bit as well. All right, so let's get into math. If you are a math person or a trend person or you like graphs, this next session is going to be really good for you. If you are not, we're going to try to explain as best as possible what all these things mean. So let's dive in. First thing is that actually just a little background before we dive in. The data here is coming from this enormous subset of giving data and estate planning data, all based on internal freewill.com data. So freewill.com is actually now the #1 estate planning tool in the country, and we think potentially the world, although we haven't done enough research in some of the large Asian countries around some of the tools there. But you can see here sort of real estate plans, the choices that people are making in aggregate. Obviously, we're protecting people's privacy here, but really interesting to see year over year. So one big thing is that estate planning overall, and online estate planning, is up in a really big way. The number of estate plannings completed increased by 50% from the same time period last year, right? The same time period roughly, ends a couple months ago, that sort of period of the year. So it's not exactly a calendar year, but we can still see the trends over time. That's a huge shift, right? 50% is an enormous move. Part of this, we'll talk about this more in a second, but is that during the pandemic, you saw people of all age groups, including 90 plus, become much more technically savvy. And there is a permanent shift to online solutions in a wide range of industries, including willmaking. Why does this matter? It's a huge vote of confidence. Partly the tools just have gotten really comprehensive, but it shows that people are making wills and leaving bequests online. This is fundamentally dissimilar than where we would have been 8 years ago. So what we see here is that sort of newer, younger plan giving employees and experts are seeing this as the norm, whereas someone who might have started their career 40 years ago needs to continuously readjust their view of how the world works because people's behavior is changing across the board. And the things they would have learned when they started their career in 1989 or 1999 or 2009 are actually just fundamentally very different than what we're seeing today. This obviously, as I mentioned, follows trends across the board. Even wealthy people are getting mortgages online, right? Many of them are finding lawyers online for other tools, things like credit checks, all of these sort of deeper, more transactional home buying, the rise of Zillow and other things like that, where people still want to see a house, but 90% of the work is done online as opposed to just driving around in a realtor's car every Saturday. And so a lot of the shift is happening. So that's one big trend. The second is that there's more interest among will makers than there has been historically in connecting with nonprofit organizations. So in the estate plan tools, we always ask people, would you like to share the information, your contact information, with a nonprofit that you're leaving a bequest to? And this number goes up and down across the board. Many of you know this. Someone mentioned earlier that historically people don't tell you. And so the free will ratios are just enormously higher than the national average. 67% of people now say, yes, send my information to the nonprofit. This is up 16 percentage points from last year. So we're seeing a really deep change in the number of people who said, yeah, let's form a relationship. Let's get in touch. And even if they're not going to sort of immediately respond to your next 3 emails because they're still getting used to this new relationship, there's really sort of some long-term investment there. So that's a big shift. We see a variety of treatments in the way in terms of by age, in terms of how willing people are to share information and connect with you. And you might have thought young donors are going to be more privacy-oriented, more tech-savvy. And the answer is a little bit different. They're actually more likely to share information, but 60 to 80-year-olds, right, that really key plan giving demographic made a big jump last year. So here's what it looks like across the board, right? So in the 20s, right, so your youngest donors, 74% want to do it. And then it stays at around 71, 65% all the way through people's 60s and 70s, a little bit of drop off in the 80s, and then some drop off in the 90s. Now, 90s is a very small portion of the overall population, but you can see that as well. Also worth noting here that people in the 90s are making their estate plans online, which is fundamentally have been wrong 5 years ago. Other big news, this is really, really, really important. Giving amounts are up by a lot, right? So people are committing far more money to charity. The value of a completed charitable gift bequest, meaning people have completed their will and allocated that in their estate plans, is $2.5 billion over the last 12 months or so. I mean, just extraordinary amounts of giving. This is a 63% increase from the same period the previous year, right? So we're up, almost 2/3, which is really remarkable, especially because people would have thought, oh, is COVID a moment of especially high will making, right? Sort of peak, we are still in a pandemic, but peak COVID, which you might have think of been, sort of more than 12 months ago. And what the answer seems to be is no, it actually just permanently shifted behavior as opposed to being a one-time spike. And so this giving get up 2/3 is extremely notable. Other thing we're seeing is that we look at giving by asset groups. How much money do you have as your total life savings? And how much of it are you giving away? And at every asset group we look at, it's up across the board. So total high assets groups increased more than 80% from last year. What you see here is the number of bequests is up 12% in the smallest group, but the total amount of money is up 26%. The next highest group, number of bequests is up, and total is up. 750K average, right? So that's basically looking at the folks who say report between $500,000 and $1 million, again up and again up as well. $1.5 million, there's this interesting question. Dina says 63% because you have more gifts. Where the number on the left is higher than the number on the right, that means the average gift went down a bit. When the number on the right is bigger, it means the average gift went up. So that 1.5 million, that 1 to 2 million range, sort of early mass affluent, that's the only number where you see the average gift went down, even though the number of bequests went way up. Again, sort of that 2 to 5 million range, both are up. The 5 to 10 million range, dramatic, like huge shifts in the number of gifts coming from the top end folks, right? So we talked about not only are older donors more comfortable, wealthy donors are more comfortable here, right? And almost a doubling of gifts coming from people with more than $10 million in assets. So across the board, just huge jumps, which is pretty exciting to see. By the way, I mentioned this at the top of the call, but this is because of the work that you all are doing. So congratulations, if you're someone driving these gifts, congratulations. You should feel really, really good about it year over year. Third trend, giving dollar amounts are up across the board. The average value of a bequest, a single gift, is up 23% from last year. And it's also up across age groups with that one exception. Folks who are 65 to 84, the average size of a bequest is up by 1/3. I mean, this is a huge shift as well. Medians are down, except for 65 to 84-year-olds, which doubled. But a lot of this is that many people who might have left zero gifts in a different framework or a different time are now including $1,000, $5,000 across the board. Or, we'll talk about this in a second, some of them who would have left an $80,000 bequest to one organization are now leaving $150,000 to 3 organizations. So total giving might be up, but the per gift is down. When we look at bequest value by age groups, you can see it here, right? So the average, this is a single bequest, not total giving per will, single bequest. The average for 85 plus, $78,000. The average for folks 65 to 84, $78,000. 50K, even 25 to 44, averaging 30K, and then obviously much smaller gifts at the lower end. So this is interesting to see. When we talk about giving amounts, this went up for both men and women, which is quite interesting. The male average gift increases to $64,000. For women, $41,000. Part of this, by the way, is that women are more likely to include multiple organizations, whereas men are more likely to concentrate their giving, right? So again, this is per bequest and not sort of total giving in a will. Does that make sense? So when we look at gender, right, you can look at the average and the median for men For women, for folks who identify as non-binary or transgender, you can see that all over the place. The bottom two categories have much less data across the board. So we're just going to name that, but we did want to reflect what folks who are self-reporting their gender see and what the average looks like across the board. Some of this, by the way, is going to be correlated with age. You look at that sort of gap between transgender and non-binary. Younger folks tend to be a little bit more willing to identify as non-binary as opposed to transgender. Trend number 3, other interesting things here. The average bequest value increased for single, married, and domestic partnerships. The bequest average for single people increased to $57,000, and for married folks to $43,000. You can see it here. This, I believe, when we show you this stat, it is a little bit misleading. And why would anyone have a sense of why this might be a little misleading? Feel free to type in the chat. Simone says it doesn't account for kids. There's some kids questions. Anybody else? Keeping separately, widows. Actually, I don't think anyone's gotten what I would have thought was the answers. So that if you think about the average, we looked at the gaps by age earlier, and the number of sort of the average age of a single person skews younger than it does a married person. So it's not folks who will never ever be married. It's at this time, and so some of that average and median is getting pushed down by Gen Z folks making wills because they're also single and they may be married in 10 years, but they're not currently. So it's important to note that actually, if you hold age constant here, if you think about baby boomers, for instance, that single to married gap is going to be very large, very large. I mean, the never married, no kids, if you have donors, volunteers who are in that category or staff, those should be your number one plan giving prospects. So important shift there. Number of wills with bequests are a little bit down, not wildly so, but just naming this. 16% of wills have bequest, down from 19% last year. This is still dramatically higher than the 2 to 5%, which is across the general US population. So we're seeing that. But the number of bequests per will is up. So how does that work? Well, what we're seeing is that the wills that have 2 bequests or more are up 46% from last year. This means there's more folks. In some ways, it's more competition for you, right? People dividing up their bequests among multiple charities, but also that you're more likely to be in more gifts, right? More wills. And so it probably means that over time, you're going to have more normalization of income from bequests, which is very good. Trend 5, Brenda says, I would leave my money to my children, not charity, which is a really great segue to our next note here, which is that, kids are on notice. The average and median gift size increased for people with children as well. Parents with adult children, as opposed to parents with minor children, saw gift size increase by double and triple digits. The average value increased 34%. The median value increased 150%. You can see this here. For folks that have kids, the average is 33,000, no kids, 72,000. So now we see a really big shift, even more pronounced in single versus married. But even looking at folks with children, you can see the gap between having minor kids, where we are surprised to see more giving happening there, right? But yet and then adult children. And so as we watch the baby boomers age, what's happening is that not only are they increasingly wealthy, but their kids, right? Millennial children, the oldest millennials are about 41 this year, 42, I think. And so you're starting to see more folks who say, well, my kids are going to be sort of okay, at least. And I don't need to give everything to the children. I can start carving out some stuff. Now, this is very different than when they were 20 years ago when those kids might have still been in college. So that's a big shift. Parents represent a large percentage of those leaving contingent bequests, most to adult children. What does that mean? It means that folks are dividing their wealth and not giving all of it. But the average gift size for people with no children is still greater. So this is super interesting. Geographic trends. So we'll spoil the surprise. Washington, D.C. continues to have the highest giving rate, meaning of people making wills, how many include bequests? Now, if anybody wants to guess before we reveal it, what do you think the next 4 states are in terms of overall sort of willingness to give? So that means how many wills have bequests compared to how many wills total? So California, New York, Arizona, Virginia, Utah, great guess, Utah, New York, California, Florida. This is not total, by the way, this is percentage, right? Because the biggest number of bequests every year is going to come from California, with the largest population, and New York and Texas and Florida are going to be next. So don't think of it as population centers. Among the people making wills, who has the highest percentage of people including charitable gifts? Lucas says Massachusetts, Dina says Ohio, Vermont, a lot of California love, a lot of New York love as well, Connecticut, the Midwest, a lot of Texas love, a couple other good guesses, Rhode Island, great ocean state of Rhode Island. I'd actually be curious before we reveal what's going into the thinking here, right? So when you say, Virginia, like, why is it Virginia? Or is it religious states? Wayne says sort of more conservative states. Becky would say where more older people live. Amelia thinks Utah because the Mormons have an extremely high giving rate. Someone else says high salaries. Wealth and liberalism is a guess. Really interesting stuff here. So let's just reveal it. So number 1 is Washington, D.C. You already knew that. Why is that? Don't know, right? The data doesn't tell us why, but a lucky guess would be, probably the most politically and sort of generally community engaged population, in that everyone's thinking about all these sorts of issues. A ton of people work at nonprofits, so that doesn't wildly surprising. New Mexico coming in at number 2. Which is I don't think anyone guessed, or I might have seen one guess. A lot of conservation, generally a little bit, relatively religious state, super interesting. New Hampshire coming in at number 3, right, which fits into your more, not quite as progressive as neighboring Vermont, but more liberal, more affluent. Massachusetts coming in at number 4, so right on the heels of New Hampshire. And then Colorado coming in number 5. So it's actually a little bit hard to draw some thematic elements here. I mean, this is all over the place. Seth says New Mexico's, becoming a really cool spot for retirement. It's, it can be a little bit more inhabitable than parts of Arizona for temperature reasons. Apparently Taos is beautiful, but really just interesting to see. Fascinating stuff there. Here's a map that you can tell darker. You can see how dark New Mexico is. That's the peak, and then lighter tends to be a little bit lower. And so you can see that when we look at the lowest giving rates, West Virginia is almost white. That may be the lowest. And then you have Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, relatively light as well. North Dakota, not having. Indiana, relatively light, surprising. You see some correlation with overall education levels here. You look at some of the most educated states, you look at Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and then you go up to the Pacific Northwest of Oregon and Seattle, but New Mexico isn't sort of overly educated compared to national averages, at least when measuring for bachelor's degrees and things like that. Minnesota, just sort of interesting to see, right? So I'll give folks Hawaii very generous, Alaska a little bit less though. Super interesting. So yeah, I would not have guessed that Utah would be lower than Wyoming, or so much lower than Colorado. But I'll give people another few seconds to just sort of find their states and see how it compares. But really interesting to see here. By the way, if you ever look at it, when you download the plan giving report, you'll see sort of numerical comparisons as well. But we figured this map would be more useful. So interesting stuff. Thanks to everyone that contributed their ideas there. Next thing, there's this huge shift in people including digital assets and wills, right? So the digital assets are anything digital that is value, discoverable. And so yes, this includes crypto and NFTs, but it also includes things like Facebook and email accounts, digital photos, A lot of people are including what's called a digital executor, so someone who sort of manages all of that. That may not be the estate. A lot of this stuff doesn't, your sort of Google photos don't have, monetary value on them, but they are interesting. 77% of wills include digital assets. So that's a really big jump. And then of those that include a bequest, almost double the wills without digital assets. So really interesting to see. They're twice as likely to bequest as last year. So what you can see here is the percentage of folks that whose wills include digital asset is more than 3/4 right now, which is pretty striking. Bill asked, how does Facebook and email have value? It doesn't per se, right? So it's not money splitting up in the same way that, when my my grandmother passed away, there were all these amazing photo albums, and those don't have a market value, right? Your random stranger doesn't want those, but obviously to the family, it was very sentimental and important, right? And so we shared in those. And now Facebook photos, for instance, play a lot of that same role. So summing up, who's the most generous? What we see is that younger individuals with fewer assets tend to give a big portion of their giving, and older individuals with the highest assets tend to give a lot as a portion of their overall wealth, right? So both of these as well. Similar to last year, lower asset, men with very few assets, men with very sort of at the low end and the high end, men tend to give more. And then women tend to give more frequently, but a lower percentage of overall dollars. So that's interesting to see. All right, so let's dive into some strategies. Thank you all for walking through all that interesting data. I imagine at least one or two of those things was surprising to you. It was surprising to me to see it, and that means we're learning a bunch. Let's talk about some strategies. The first thing is the number one mistake that people make in plan giving is they overly narrow their plan giving audience, right? Number one mistake, overly narrowing. Why is that? Because we have this mental model of a donor pyramid where you sign a petition or you give us your email address, and then maybe you attend an event, and then maybe you make a donation, and then maybe you're a monthly donor, and then you're a major donor, and then you're a plan giving donor. And it turns out that's totally wrong. A lot of people jump right to plan giving because they need to make an estate plan. And so you're seeing folks who may have never given or have given $20 and are dropping $800,000 in a bequest. And so the aperture opening is really important. Sending to more people, surprise, surprise, leads to higher generation rates, meaning just more gifts. And given the giving rates across age groups, don't feel like you need to exclude younger donors. Now, yes, this money is going to be deeper in the future, but two things happen here. One is your younger donors who make a planned gift, research shows that they're going to up their annual giving in subsequent years by as much as 75%. And then secondly, on top of that, for younger donors, you'll identify who your really committed supporters are. But then for older donors, they get so excited when they can be part of a giving community that includes younger donors. And the gap between saying, hey, we're emailing all our 90-year-olds and you're on that list about planned giving versus, hey, everybody from 18 to 88 needs a will. Here's a resource for you. That feels very different to older donors. So actually by including younger donors, you may be more successful with older donors as well. Oh, that's so kind. Christine says, this is one of the most interesting and compelling FreeWill webinars I've attended. Thank you. We'll take that as a mild insult to the other webinars, but you're forgiven. The strategy says, the other thing is that organizations who send to at least 5,000 donors see much higher giving rates. Not surprising, but what it does is it discounts the idea that you should just pick your sort of super target list, right? Be more broad, take some chances here, and you'll generate more success. This, by the way, is true across cause areas. So for religion, for humanitarian organizations, for community organizations, for environmental groups, for what we call eds and meds, right? Big colleges, big hospitals, true across the board. Christine, you're all good. And you can see this sort of over time, right? People sending to bigger audiences get more gifts. Pretty straightforward, but this is really, really, really important to know. I want to drill on this a little bit because you all said time and resources are your number one challenge, right? And one of the things that if you are sending an email, particularly email, right, more than mail, because your cost is going to go up as you expand your mail list, that it takes very little effort to send it to more people. right? It's much harder. It takes more effort to send 2 emails to 10,000 people than 1 email to 20,000 people. And so when you can expand this, you'll see more results without any real additional work. And so that's why we're driving at this with our top strategy. Second, we have found that this concept of Make a Will Month turns out to be not only the most powerful idea in modern planned giving fundraising, but one of the most successful things in all nonprofit fundraising across the board. So August is Make a Will Month, and historically no one's cared at all, which, no blame to anyone. But our team a couple of years ago, much to my counter argument, I was like, this is a dumb idea. They said, no, Make a Will Month is going to be really important. And this is what it looks like, right? So people sending emails about Make a Will Month, engaging with donors then just moves the needle to an enormous degree, right? Looking at more than $450 million committed in 1 month, in the traditional slowest month of the fundraising year, and something like 400,000 visits to the website at that same time, right? Just astounding behavior. Now, why does this work? It's because planned giving's fatal flaw, compared to annual giving or something else, is that there's no real deadline. I'll do it next year, even though I said that last year. That's what people say. And giving someone say, hey, we're all doing this together right now in this month pushes a ton of people off the sidelines into behavior. It's just unbelievable. David says in DC area, his local public broadcasting station is plugging this, and it's really, really useful. So make sure to capitalize on this. You need to be going broad during Make a Will Month. Folks who participated this year received more dollars than ever before. It is by far the #1 campaign driving traffic to planned giving sites. Other interesting things. A couple of years ago when we started, someone said, hey, I'd love to do this year. But if I do it next year, am I going to have already sort of taken care of all the people that want wills? Am I going to see a lot of success in year 1 and less in year 2? And this was a really big question. And what we had to tell them is, hey, we hope not, because we didn't have any data in the first year on what the second year would look like. And what we saw instead this year is that the nonprofits who participated a second time in Make a Will Month typically saw more success the next time around. Partly because those folks who were sort of on the sidelines remembered from last year. And we all know that marketing is about repetition. And so it turns out that they were more successful the second time around, which is really, really interesting. The third thing is that we saw a really interesting dynamic this year. And we had a couple of executive directors and big development directors at big organizations, small organizations said, this is so cool. It's a great service that we're providing for our donors. Does anyone let their staff or their volunteers participate? Because those people all need an estate plan too. And nobody loves our organization more than the people that spend 40 hours a week in the middle of it. And so we saw that planned giving email messages, well, first we'll talk about donors for a second, generated gifts at the highest rate. So this education component is super important. This is what it looks like from our friends at GPB, which I actually don't know where GPB is, but it's a PBS station. So if anyone knows where call sign GPB is, let us know. Oh, it's in Georgia. It's in the first sentence. Georgia Public Broadcasting, my bad. And so you can see here, it says, from our favorite children's programs in the nightly news, we're here to share stories, etc. This is Make a Will Month. Also, here are some fast facts about estate planning. If you don't have one, you're not alone. Nearly 2/3 of Americans don't have a plan in place. Without a will, local laws will determine how your assets are distributed. This is one of the best ways to protect what you love and dictate important decisions on your own terms. Here's a plan, make a will, join other people like you. It's free, it's quick. And this sort of education level, wait, does anyone notice anything here? It's a planned giving email. Does anyone notice anything about this email? Feel free to type in the chat. It never mentions planned giving. Not once does it say make a bequest. And yet it's wildly successful. Why is that? Because the biggest hurdle in planned giving is not getting people to care about your organization. They care about your organization, otherwise they wouldn't be chipping in on a monthly or quarterly or annual basis to you. It's getting people off the sidelines through their estate planning and then making sure that charitable giving is part of that. So it's really, really interesting. Okay, coming back to the staff point I was making earlier, I got my slides confused. People said, hey, our staff need this too. We said, okay, well, here's some, based on all the best practices we know, here's an internal staff email offering the tools and estate planning tools. And what it does is it provides a really strong employee benefit and it drives gifts. So 80% of the folks in Make a Will Month also took the time to educate internal staff. 80%, right? 4 to 5. And it was the second most successful tactic behind emails to donors, which, as you can imagine, is a much larger pool. So think about that. Email, and then email to staff, and then things like social media. So an email to your 200 or your 20 or your 2,000 staff can often be more successful than, say, blasting out your 50,000 Facebook friends. Because these are the people that really, really, really give a darn about your organization. And so it's one of the things where everybody's better off, right? They get access to this great tool. Some of these folks are not going to leave a gift, and that's totally fine. All right, so we got a couple more things to talk about, but we're going to wrap up pretty soon. The fourth strategy is stewarding supporting wealthy donors. Rick and Kendra asked about the board at exactly the same time. So let me just say, yes, you would put the board on this. And in many cases, the board is your wealthiest donors. Not always, right? Some of it's very strategic focus, but your wealthy donors really matter here. And so we are just going to name that these really need to get involved. Many of you say, well, my wealthiest donors all have a plan already. And what we see is the answer is actually no, because we watch people with $15 million in assets or more make plans on the site all the time, right? And by the way, if they already have a plan, they must have done that at some point. So it's not, there'll be certainly people who are in that category. And for many, they do have a plan, but it's wildly out of date. They have 3 new grandkids. They sold their house in Florida, right? They came into new money. They lost the money. All of these things happen. It turns out that wealthy people are not so different from the rest of us. They just look like humans with more money. And so they also don't want to think about their own mortality. So they also don't engage on this pretty regularly. And so many more than you might think choose to start their estate planning online, even if they finalize with an attorney. Now, why is that? Why would you see sort of outsized behavior from the wealthiest on an online tool, right? It's very, lawyers are expensive, right? But you would think, okay, well, they're still going to use more. On average, your wealthier donors are going to be more educated. On average, your educated donors are going to be more tech savvy. And so the tech savviness is going to be correlated with income and wealth, right? Because it's correlated with education. On average, they will also potentially be more pressed for time than others. Not across the board, but certainly to some degree. And so the idea that you might want to engage with some of these very difficult personal, emotional decisions on your own, or with your spouse, or with your kids, before you go walk into an office on Elm Street is really important. So we're seeing a lot of usage here, people saying, well, let me get my affairs in order on my own terms, in a way that I'm increasingly comfortable with online. And then if I've got complex, some wealthy people have very simple estates. They just have a lot of money. Some people that are more complex estates are going to be getting all these affairs in order and then bringing it to attorney. And what attorneys tell us when these folks come is, I've literally never seen anyone more prepared. And it's really important that they're doing this pathway, because we know that many of those attorneys are not asking about charitable giving, right? It's just not part of the flow for most folks. So that's really interesting. One fun thing recently I have to share is that we're starting to get more attorneys emailing us and saying, hey, can we use the FreeWill tool for our clients? And then just sort of hand it over. And we're sort of debating internally how that might work for those folks. But it's really interesting to see. Okay, well, that's sort of a big look at the year past, which is a big look at all the hard work you've done and driving just enormous sums of giving, which we hope and we expect will power your organization for decades to come. I mean, $2.5 billion plus over the last year is pretty awesome. So, if you can pat yourself on the back or give yourself a round of applause silently, go for it. So my marketing team does want me to share a little bit more about FreeWill, particularly how someone like Defenders of Wildlife. So many of you know Defenders, great organization based out of the DC area. potentially many of their staff are probably doing this. They already had a robust planned giving program. But they sort of thought they were just hiring the same donors year after year, and they really wanted to broaden that reach, right? So we talked about what is it like to do year after year? Well, if you're only talking to 10 people or even 50 people, it can be a little repetitive. They wanted to broaden their reach to complement the outstanding work of their existing team. And in 1 year, they secured 300 new gifts totaling $7 million from a wider, much more diverse audience than they previously targeted, which is pretty cool because planned giving historically has not been that diverse. So that's pretty exciting. Our friend Jim over there says, FreeWill has enabled us to reach people deeply outside of normal donor base, take our program to a whole new level, and create a new level of long-term commitments to defenders. So that's pretty exciting. We love working with Jim. But you just want to take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. And then we ask folks, like, what's useful? People will say, we love having the strategy. We love the support in writing that takes the pressure off me because we heard that time and resources are the most scarce. And then we're just like responsive humans because we like you. We just tend to really like working with all our partners. So that's pretty cool as well. All right. So we are going to, my colleague June is going to drop a survey into the chat. Thank you, June, for doing that. Part of that is, first things first on the, let me just switch this here. First thing is we're going to give this book away. Being a great storyteller is going to make your life a ton better. Fill that out. We're going to select 20 folks and we will send it to you. There is the link right now in the chat if you don't see it already to the form. Please fill that out right now. It will make our life a lot better. And make a note in the survey if you'd like a chance to receive this. Other big resources, we are going to send you the whole report. So the slides will be useful, but some of you are like, well, this is great, but how does Nebraska compare to Kansas right now? And are women who are 45 to 50 more likely to be making gifts than men who are 5 years older? And the answer for that is in the planned giving report. So download it. Don't read the whole thing straight through, but take a look at some of the really interesting pieces. We're really proud of it. It is by far the most sophisticated data on estate plans in the country and in the world. And so you should learn a lot from it. And we also have a complete guide to legacy programs in case that is interesting to you as well. So please make sure to fill it out so we can send you the report. If you're interested in talking to one of our wonderful folks on the team about things like bequest tools, stock giving, qualified charitable distributions, which is an enormously powerful giving type from folks over 70, or crypto giving, which is an enormously powerful giving type for folks who are much younger, just make a note in the survey and we will hook you up with somebody. We are a good fit for organizations who do at least about $1 million plus in individual contributions or have at least about 5,000 email supporters. If you are smaller than this, we still love you. We are thinking about different offerings, but right now it sort of doesn't really make sense to partner. And so let us know if you're a smaller org that's interested. Thank you, June, for that link. And then in a few weeks, so November 27th, which I think is 2 weeks from Thursday, Chris, and I'm likely to join as well, we're going to do a really deep dive on what we call national, state, and local features. What does that mean? It means, can you put your organization on the FreeWill tool, the public tool that hundreds of thousands of people are coming to every year, so that when someone in Wyoming comes to make their estate plan, at the very moment they're deciding about their charitable giving, you, Wyoming PBS, are front and center. Or if you're a larger organization, you are in front and center of everybody around the country making their estate plans. Or if you think, we're just doing amazing work in the Phoenix area and we want these 20 zip codes, come check that out. We're really pumped about it. This is just sort of a easy button to drive a whole bunch of new planned gift prospects. So please do that. And yeah, you can also ask for a one-on-one walkthrough of the tools. We're going to dive into some questions and answers. If you haven't already, please take the short survey, and maybe I'll walk you quickly through some next steps before we get to some Q&A. So we are doing another session in 2 weeks from today, same time, same place, on some last-minute strategy upgrades for end-of-year giving. So a lot of you have your plans in place. There are a couple of very small tweaks that can generate very significant changes in the outcomes. We know that some of you are less confident than you used to be about hitting your goals this year. And so we really, really want to help. Come to that and come hang out with us. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to dive into questions for about 4 minutes, and then we're going to let you all get a little bit of time back for your next meeting. Okay. Questions? Do we have stats on effectiveness or complementarity of drip/paper-based plan giving communications? Jill, I don't have any great data for you off the top of my head. What I will say is that increasingly, email is being used in place of direct mail. Why is that? One, it's easier to reach a broader audience. Two is it's an effective use of, it's a more effective use of money sometimes. And three is when the step to take is online, things that are already online tend to be more effective. We don't say cut out direct mail in totality, but make sure that it's complementing your email strategy. And many people presume that email is not reaching 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, even 90-year-olds, and they're now wrong. They were right 8-10 years ago, but they're now incorrect. And so there are fewer and fewer donors who can't be reached by email and text messages than there would have been in the past. Great question. Jen says, it's all the data from FreeWill only? Yes, it is. So this is where we have a super set of data that we can slice and dice. Great question. Let me look at some other questions. We had a question from Angel. Do you record demographic data for folks creating wills? We're curious about the breakdown by age and generation, which we did share a bunch. Gender, ethnicity. We do not capture ethnicity. Doesn't sort of need to be recorded in the will. Maybe at some point. There's some interesting data appends. I know that political organizations do this, and if anyone has great information on that, where you basically sort of tack on last name matching, and it's imperfect, but you can get a rough sense of sort of which last names are more likely to be different ethnicities and sort of control for that. Hasn't been a priority right now, but it's an interesting data question in the future. What else? Okay, this is a really good question from Susan. Susan says, I'm leading a legacy giving initiative for Global Green Grants Fund. We are planning to send emails during National Estate Planning Awareness Week. My question is about whom to include in that email list. My colleague thinks 24-month lapse to current donors, all levels. Is there an argument for sending to lapsed donors beyond 24 months? Susan, strong yes. So just to be clear on verbiage here, lapsed donor means someone who would have given maybe last year or up to 2 years ago, but hasn't given recently. Lapsed donors beyond that, meaning people who used to give. Susan, this is a great opportunity to provide a different type of engagement to donors who've actively chosen not to give over the last 2 years. Now, as a reminder to your colleagues, one is all of these people are mortal, definitionally. Many of them are going to need to have an estate plan, and you providing it is going to really open the door there. And so given that they haven't donated in 2 years, this may be the best avenue where you're providing a service to re-engage with them, whereas just asking them for another donation may be unlikely because they've shown in their behavior that they're not ready to engage right now. So this might be a really good opportunity to do that as well. Good. A couple other questions. A couple folks asked about, does an email to the board work? Yes, strong recommendation. Here's a couple of quick tips to make that board email better. One, do not make the board feel targeted. Instead, emphasize how much of the community is engaging. Dear board members, this week is National Estate Planning Awareness Week, which, by the way, I think is coming up in like a week. Our volunteers, our staff, and our broad membership base are all participating. And we are urging all those folks to make an estate plan and potentially include our organization in their will. We'd love to invite you to join all those people. Does everyone see the difference there between, board members are just like, we are always asking, we're carrying the organization. And so what you really have to do is say, you're just one of many. You're just part of the community. And if all these other people are doing it, who may be working, at the organization 40 hours a week, so more work than you, they may not have the assets that you have, right? If they're doing it, then you might want to also do it. That's a really compelling message. So great question. There was one other question that I wanted to answer, which is, in a previous session, we strongly suggested asking for stock at end of year giving. Does that hold true? The answer is 100% yes. 3 reasons here. One, virtually all of your, certainly all of your upscale donors will have some appreciated assets. So it is better off for them. They're in a mindset where they're thinking about saving money. So you can hold that mindset and say, great, you can save even more on taxes by giving stock. By the way, they can always rebuy the same stock. 2, reminding people of their wealth as opposed to their income, right? Think about their IRA, think about their bank accounts. It drives way more giving than reminding people about their paycheck. There's some really interesting research around that. 3, these gifts tend to be way larger. So the fastest way to increase giving from an individual is to change the way they give. And for many people, stock giving is going to be the largest type of real-time gift they make. So a very strong recommendation on stock giving. Okay, we're going to pause there. It's almost 1 o'clock Eastern. And we'll just wrap up with a really big thank you to you all. For driving just an enormously successful year here in Planned Giving. Congratulations, especially for those of you where it's full-time or close to a job. And second of all, for continuing to learn and push yourself. Like, we are just in a rapidly changing world, which means our career is different, every year than it was last year. And it requires us and behooves us to be these sort of constant learners, where, previous times we might have gotten away with just being experts and sort of stroking our beards and, talking about all the things we've learned over the years. And it's really important that we continue to upgrade our learning. So thank you so much. And have a wonderful rest of the week. And we will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.